Srimad Bhagavatam Goswami Shiva Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava ki jai, ISKCON founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur ki jai, Prem Jagaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Radhikara Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavrinda ki jai, Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gaur Gopinanda Shama Kunda Radha Kundagiri Govardhana ki jai, Shri Shri Vrindavan Dhama ki jai, Navadvip Dhama ki jai, Shri Mayapur Dham ki jai, Ganga Maya ki jai, Gaur Shri Premanandi Hari Hari Bol Shamadeka Bhaktivinoda ki jai, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to the assembled devotees, all glories to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaivam Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jaya Mudidaya Nasta Parayeshu Abhadreshu Ritam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Ramashokir Bhakti Bhavati Naishtiki. Reading from the third canto, chapter 21, text number 6. Ruchir Yo Bhagavan Brahman Daksho Brahmana Sitaha Yata Sarsaja Bhutani Vadva Bhayam Cha Manavim Ruchiyo Bhagavan Brahman Dakshava Brahmana Sitaha Yata Sarsaja Bhutani Vadva Bhayam Cha Manivam Ruchiryo Bhagavan Brahman Dakshava Brahmana Sutaha Yata Sasarja Bhutani Vadva Bharyam Cha Manavim Ruchiryo Bhagavan Brahman Dakshava Brahmana Sutaha Yata Sasarja Bhutani Vadva Bharyam Cha Manavim
Ruchiyo Bhagavan Brahman
Ruchiryo Bhagavan Brahman
Dakshava Brahmana Sutta
Dakshava Brahmana Sutaha
Asa Sajja Bhutani
Yata Sasarja Bhutani
Bharyam Chamanavim
Vadva Bharyam Cha Manivam
Ruchiyo Bhagavan Brahma
Ruchiryo Bhagavan Brahman
Dakshava Brahmana Sutta
Dakshava Brahmana Sutaha
Dasasaja Bhutani
Yata Sasarja Bhutani
Bhavayam Samanavi
Vadva Bharyam Cha Manavim
Ruchiryo Bhagavan Brahman
Ruchiryo Bhagavan Brahman
Dakshava Brahmana Sudaham
Dakshava Brahmana Sutaha
Yathasa Sarja Bhutani
Yata Sasarja Bhutani
Vadva Bharyam Chamanavim
Vadva Bharyam Cha Manavim Ruchiryo Bhagavan Brahman Dakshava Brahmana Sutaha Yata Sasarja Bhutani Vadva Bharyam Cha Manavim Ruchiryo Bhagavan Brahman Dakshava Brahmana Sutaha Yata Sasarja Bhutani Vadva Bharyam Cha Manavim Ruchi Yaha Bhagavan Wonderful Brahman O holy sage Dakshaha Daksha Va Brahmanaha of Lord Brahma Sitaha the sun Yata in what way? Sarja generated Bhutani offspring. Labdva, after securing. Varyam, as their wives. Cha, and. Manavim, the daughters of Swayambhuva Manu. Translation by Srila Prabhupada. O holy sage, tell me how the worshipful Ruchi and Daksha, the son of Brahma, generated children after securing as their wives the other two daughters of Swayambhuva Manu. Responsibly, O holy sage, tell me how the worshipful Ruchi and Daksha, the son of Brahma, generated children after securing as their wives the other two daughters of Swayambhuva Manu. Reported by Srila Prabhupada. All the great personalities who increased the population in the beginning of the creation are called Prajapatis. Brahma is also known as Prajapati, as were some of the later sons, Swayambhuva Manu, as well as some of the later sons. Swayambhuva Manu is also known as Prajapati, as is Daksha, another son of Brahma. Swayambhuva had two daughters, Akuti and Prashuti. The Prajapati Ruchi named Akuti, and Daksha married Prasuti. Each couples and their children produced immense numbers of children to populate the entire universe. Vidura's inquiry was, how did they beget the population in the beginning? The verse again. O holy sage, tell me how the worshipful Ruchi and Daksha, the son of Brahma, generated children after securing as their wives the other two daughters of Swayambhuva Manu. Mukam karoti vachalam bhangam mangayate girim yat kripataraham bande shiguru dinatadane. The beginning is very different from what is generally thought of as the beginning. According to Darwinian theory, the beginning was a piece of matter, sometimes referred to as a chunk. Then more and more sophisticated beings evolved. According to the Vedas, evolution is evolution of consciousness, and there's the beginning was created by the Prajapatis. So this was thousands and thousands of years ago, the beginning, whereas Brahminian or Darwinian evolution thinks it was only a few hundred years ago. So there's a vast difference, and this is one of the ways in which Srila Prabhupada challenged the modern theory of evolution. He wasn't content with just getting people to worship and love Krishna, but was taking issue with the domestic way of thinking. The domestic way of thinking is that we evolved gradually, but evolution is a form of consciousness, and as consciousness became more and more sophisticated, people became more and more sophisticated. Of the 8,400,000 forms of life, 400,000 are said to be humans, and of the 400,000, only a small percentage, maybe 10 or 20%, are what Prabhupada called civilized. The rest are more or less primitive, or non-civilized. But according to Vedic literature, even those who are so-called uncivilized can become great devotees, because the human beings are more advanced, and they have the ability to discern what is real and what is not real. Sometimes people are greatly challenged by disasters. And Prabhupada has told us that even in an air crash, there's a factor that's invisibly called destiny. That according to karma, these passengers were destined to die at that moment. And it sounds a bit callous, because it is a bit callous. But Prabhupada was asked in one lecture, and this was in, just as ISKCON was being incorporated, it was in July or June of 1966, the lawyer who was incorporating ISKCON named Stephen Goldsmith waited till very respectably till Prabhupada finished. And he was leaning up against the wall. This is in 26th Avenue. And he asked Prabhupada a question that had been plaguing him for some time, even though he was very active in serving Prabhupada. He asked him, he said, if God is all good, why is it that so many of our young boys are being killed in Vietnam? This is when the Vietnam conflict was going on. So without hesitation, and I was there, so I heard this happen, Prabhupada said, and he pointed his index finger straight at Stephen Goldsmith and said, God is saying, you are killing so many animals, so, he said, send your sons to the slaughterhouse. And Stephen Goldsmith, as we often hear in court proceedings, had no further questions. That was the end of the question and answer period. It was a stark revelation, but it's true. And it sounds a bit callous, and in a way it is, because it's very tragic that so many people departed in that great conflict that happened. But it did happen, and that's one of the reasons how it happened. And karma is very mysterious. Sometimes we hear of something called the law of karma, but it's not exactly a law. Things like had happened recently in Los Angeles, where several people lost their homes, their photo albums, their jewelry, and everything in fires. From a karmic point of view, one could say, well, they had it coming to them. But in another way, devotees are very active. Like there was a flood here a few years ago, and devotees were very active in serving the people who had become homeless, and or in some cases, people even died in the floods. So there's sometimes the element of compassion takes over, and even though it's callous to say they had it's part of destiny. It just happened because it was meant to happen. Devotees show themselves to be caring and uncallous. Prabhupada has also mentioned in some of his writings that a true devotee is totally compassionate, feeling the whips on other people's back. And it's one of his devotees said that his greatest desire was that he would accept all of the karmic reactions from all of the sinful people in all of the world on his own self if Prabhupada would relieve them. So devotees are by nature compassionate, but at the same time there's something called destiny, or the law, not the law, but of karma, which is invisibly operating, and somehow it's causing bad things to happen. So this is a common question, and once when Prabhupada was traveling on an airplane, he said that this was about 5 years ago. Not 5 years ago, this is in about 1965, or 1974, 72, or I don't know exactly what the date was, but Prabhupada was in his mood of traveling all over the world, and the pilot had put the airplane on what's called automatic pilot. And he came back and sat next to Prabhupada. And the question that was very much on his mind was, why is there evil in the world? It's very similar to the question that Stephen Goldsmith was asking. Why is there evil in the world if God is compassionate, all good? And Prabhupada explained this in a way that only an airplane pilot could understand fully. And he said that Ordinarily, we're facing God, and when we face God and we're devotees of God, we're definitely cared for by God. But sometimes evil things happen, and that's, in a sense, that is called the backside of God. So this airplane pilot knew that when flying from east to west, time changes. Sometimes Prabhupada talked about his flight from Paris to Los Angeles taking 9 or 10 hours, but when he arrived in Los Angeles, only 4 hours had expired. So that was his way of explaining that the higher you go in the material world, the more relative time can be. And the time frame from Rama's life, which is unimaginably long, 4.3 million times 1,000 is just one day. It goes to show that time is relative, and even some scientists have touched on this, but no one has fully explained the meaning of how time can be so relative. It does happen. So Prabhupada was very adamant by the modern way of life and modern thinking that we evolved by random action, and of the 8.4 million forms of life, only 400,000 are human. Out of the 400,000 humans, only a small percentage are what Prabhupada called civilized, or they can distinguish, they can hear that the soul and the body are different. And he says that an intelligent person wants to know how this can be. And he quotes one of the Goswamis, I think it was Raghunath Swami, saying, or Sanatana Goswami saying, who am I, or what am I? And even though that person was very advanced materially, very, very accurate and very careful about details, this was a question that was completely honest. It's a philosophical question that only more advanced people can ask, because they wonder what it is. And it's also understood that Raghunath Swami was very expert at ordinary dealings. He was a minister in the Mohammedan government, and it was discovered that his uncle and father, Rania and Govardhana Majumdar, who were tax collectors, were keeping some of the money and not giving it all to the king, who was a Hindu king, and that was in Orisha or Bengal. But somehow or other, the two brothers, Haranya and Majumdar, and his brother, Govardhana, they heard that a government official was coming to arrest them for cheating them, so to speak, and not giving them all their collections of taxes. And so they fled. And when the minister arrived, or the government's representative arrived, only Raghunath was at home. And at the age of only teenage age, about 16, he pacified this man. And even though he was arrested ultimately, he spoke in such a way that he was released, and the government didn't proceed with charges against his uncle and father. So devotees are also, they can be practical. And one of the things that is written in Nectar Devotion is that one should not be neglectful of ordinary things. And so avoiding government arrest is, in a way, is an ordinary thing, and fleeing a tax collector by not adhering to a small incursion, which was actually illegal. One does not neglect ordinary things, and they can be overcome by devotees. Or they're not only expert in spiritual life, but they're experts in ordinary things. And when Sanatana was arrested, he had to resort to the black market to bribe the jailkeeper to let him go. He was arrested because he had resigned from his government post, and first he offered the jailkeeper a sum of money. He had some money put away. He was a very wealthy individual. And then that wasn't enough, so then he offered him twice as much, and finally the man said, well, actually I was going to kill you and take all of your money. But now I'm going to let you go because he didn't tell him why, but I guess he saw that gold was a very important thing to him. But he said, I have one request of you. I'm concerned that the Nawab is going to arrest and maybe even kill me because somehow you escaped my vigilance. And in those days, when prisoners had to answer the call of nature, the jail keepers went with them to ensure that they would not escape. So Mukunda Goswami told the jailer a little story that he could tell the Nawab, and he said that you tell the Nawab that you will come in me to evacuate, and then all of a sudden, even though my two legs were shackled together, I dove into the river. And it happened so fast, and the current of the river was so fast that even though he tried to catch me, he couldn't do it. And this was what the story was that he told them, how he was very compassionate upon even his inimical jailer. And the jailer was saved from execution by telling this little practical story to the Nawab. So sometimes it's misunderstood how evil can exist in the world at all when God is all compassionate and all good. So in a way, this was explained to the airplane pilot who said that if you stand in the shadow of God, you become evil. So in other words, when these Prajapatis created human beings, they not only created good people who would go back to Godhead, but people who are traditionally and from the very start of their life, very inimical, very demonic. There's a passage in the 3rd canto about how a child prays in the womb to get out of this miserable condition. It's sometimes said, there's an English proverb that says that there are no atheists in the foxholes, which means that when people are at war, they're praying, they start praying to God that they will not be killed. And so similarly, there's some passages in the 3rd canto about how embryos are very much alive and in a fetal position with their hands folded, they're praying to Krishna to get out of this situation. And then as soon as they're born, they forget everything and they resort to their very demonic ways. So this kind of puzzled me. They said, in one way, it seems that Prabhupada is saying that all people are suffering and are praying to God. But there's another passage in which it is said in the 3rd canto that only the most fortunate people pray to Krishna in the womb. And as soon as they're released, they're still devotees. They're devotees in the womb, they're devotees out of the womb, and Krishna creates all living beings, whether they're of demonic nature or whether they're of a good nature. It's from the very beginning of life. So in Kali Yuga, 99% or something, or maybe 90% of the people are demonic, and they don't believe in God. They believe that because of advances in medicine and flight and communication, that they're going to live forever. Well, maybe medical science can extend their lives for another 10 or 20 or 30 years, but ultimately they're going to have to go. And no invention of pharmaceutical science has enabled people to live forever, even though that's a kind of common thought that if we continue to make advances in medicine, we're going to enable people to live forever. So if a person gets to be 400 or 500 years old in the West, what kind of people are they going to be? Are they going to have memories? Are they going to have brains? Are they going to be able to think? Or are they just going to be walking sort of robots? That's a question that the people have to ask if we're able to live. And there was a time when I think it was in 1967 or 68 when many people of Asian origin, especially of Indian origin, were kicked out of the country of Uganda by a black ruler named Idi Amin. He didn't like people who were different. And somehow or other, one of the nearest Western countries to Uganda was England. And so, in a way, all of a sudden, several people, 100,000 people or more, 400,000 people descended on London, and they were of Indian origin. And because the British were the colonizers of the whole world, they tolerated, they didn't mind it, and actually they came to admire the fact that so many people from that part of the world were saving their money. They weren't, they were obedient workers. They were dependable and responsible citizens, and they even elected an Indian as prime minister of the country recently. I don't know if he's still, probably no longer, but he was elected. So they have become very, very respected minority, sort of minority in that country. As opposed to most people in Great Britain who are very atheistically minded people, most of them. Of course, even the most atheistically and demonic people can become devotees. There are instances of people who have become devotees, but it's not ordinary. That's how the Prajapatis, somehow they created evil. Evil was always existing, but it was, especially in Kali Yuga, it's a very common thing for people to be atheistic. So those are the comments on, I'll read the verse again. It says, "O holy sage, tell me how the worshipful Ruchi Daksha, the son of Brahma, generated children after securing as their wives the other two daughters of Swayambhuva Manu." So Prabhupada is very careful and very astute in criticizing Darwinian theory of evolution. So I think we'll stop at that point, and if you have any comments or questions about this or anything else. Bonnie? You want to talk to the world or speak?
Maharaj, it's just an observation that you're mentioning earlier that, a plane crashed, everybody on board seems to be destined to die at the same time. And you also mentioned the relationship between slaughterhouse and people dying on the battlefield like that. So I remember in the 1980s there was a plane crash in Scotland. So it became known as the Lockerbie plane disaster. So because they crashed into the village of Lockerbie. So one thing that wasn't really reported was the main industry of that village was a slaughterhouse. And, thousands of animals were being killed that day, every day there. Somehow or other that plane crashed into
the Scotland Yard of the British Policing Agency is so astute that they went all the way to Liberia or Libya, which was a place where Colonel Gaddafi was the Prime Minister. And they went to a number, this was all paid for by Scotland Yard. They sent two of their agents to that country. And they went to every luggage manufacturer that was retailing luggage. And because they had found a couple of pieces of cloth where the bomb had blown out of the plane. And they asked the proprietors of these luggage shops if they ever had any luggage with this pattern on them. And one of them said yes. And he said, "Do you remember who purchased it?" And they said yes. And then gradually they tracked down the people who planted the bomb. The Prime Minister of that country wasn't ever arrested or in any way, who was probably the brains behind the whole operation. But these two people were ultimately convicted of murder of a whole airplane. And it's very interesting that I was in England, and I was in northern Scotland at the time. And as I was driving through, it was just a few days after this airplane had crashed. There were tapes, yellow tapes, saying police incident, do not enter. And so this investigation was, they were so thorough that they tracked down the people. I mean, it's almost impossible, but they did it. They tracked down the people who planted the bomb in the airplane. That's a very interesting topic, that place, Lockerbie, was a place of making munitions. Any other comments? Yes?
Thank you, Srimad. You were saying how Karma is also sometimes called destiny. Karma is also sometimes called destiny. So there was a plane crash just a few days ago, and everybody on the plane died except for 2 people.
I heard about that, yeah.
Isn't that interesting? That their karma was not to die that day,
Right.
despite everybody else on the plane. I also heard a story, you know, you're mentioning that typical sort of question from an atheist. If there's a Supreme Lord, then why is there bad, evil things in the world? So I heard this story about this atheistic professor in the 1930s, and he was challenging his students, you know, like, if there's, you know, God, and there's evil. So one of the students put his hand up to challenge the professor. And he said to the professor, so, dear sir, he said, you experience cold in your life, do you? The professor said, of course, yes, cold's a real thing. And this student who was a physicist said, actually, in terms of physics, there's no such thing as cold, really. There's only absence of heat. And he said, the same way he said, you experience darkness, yes? And the professor said, yeah. And he said, the same thing, there's no real such a substance as darkness. It's only absence of light. So in the same way, there's an absence of the Supreme Lord. Anyway, apparently that student was Albert Einstein.
Thank you very much. Any other comments or questions?
Hare Krishna, thank you for class. Just a comment, or you can comment on the comment. There was something that came up about the houses that got burnt in California, and then one house would be not burnt, and all the houses around were burnt. So they were investigating whose house it was and making a comment about whose house it was. And many of those people were very big donators to some caring thing for some humanity thing.
I also heard that the house that survived the fires was owned by a guy who bought some water sprinklers, about 5 or 6 of them, put some on the roof of his house and all around his house. And because of that amount of water that had been stored, that house was spared the burning.
Mm-hmm. Well, he used his intelligence, didn't he?
Yeah, but it's also common that somehow or other his house was saved, but he anticipated the possible danger of fire. Just so you know, I was in contact with the devotees in Los Angeles, and none of them were hurt. The fires were quite a ways away from where they were. So no one in Dwarka they didn't ever lose anything.
I was told, I think by Narayani Mataji, Sringananda's house got burned.
I don't know if it got burned, but he had to evacuate. I heard that they had to evacuate about 180,000 residents at the time. Anyway, I was in one of those houses, and those houses were like palaces. It's just hard to imagine that they don't exist anymore, but they don't. Okay, I think we'll stop at that point. Hare Krishna.